Because while pumps thrum and the ceiling sweats, a British officer named George Blake is already sitting with the KGB, telling them exactly what's coming. He's an SIS case officer turned asset, recruited in the early 1950s. Ideology, prison pressure, pick your blend. He doesn't stop the tunnel. He hands Moscow a choice. And they make the cold, brilliant choice. Don't kill the tunnel, feed it. Let it live long enough to teach you how the West thinks. Keep the audio encrypted and clean so the purists nod. But salt the pattern layer, the metadata, until the model learns your lies as truth. Counterintelligence over time beats a clean bust every day. If they smash it now, you get a headline. If you steer it, you get strategy. So crews finally reach the cable run. Wet soil, lead sheathing, paper-insulated copper. Old lines, but tight enough to carry high-level traffic. The TAP team slices in with surgical pride. They sweat impedance, match levels, and bridge without dropping the line. The first captures roll. On paper, it's a miracle. Streams of switching data. Busy hour peaks. Hierarchies shimmering into view. The buzz in Langley and London is electric. They think they've found a window into a closed city's nervous system. But wait, here's the twist. Under that clay, physics doesn't care about pride. A splice a few ohms off. An unshielded run that sits too close to a stray ground path. Moisture turning the trench into a messy dielectric. Little stuff, the kind of stuff you wave off as line quirks, because, come on, this is East German infrastructure. Nothing is lab grade. Those quirks are the seed of something lethal. In the analysis huts, doctrine hardens fast. People write sampling windows into code. They set cutoff rules that strip outliers. Early wins, perfectly timed exercises, clean escalations during crises, bake confirmation bias into the workflow. Production metrics climb, reports hit desks on time. The model looks prescient, careers attached to this feed. And inside those compartments, dissent is treated like static. Fix your thresholds, filter the noise, keep the charts clean. Across town, SIS techs jot odd notes, stable delayed replicas at fixed millisecond offsets, crosstalk whispers that look like switch events, echo bands that don't behave like healthy lines. Those notes don't travel far. Boxes are boxes, and the bigger machine wants a win. Meanwhile, the KGB watches. They don't have to guess the windows anymore. They know them. They can time ghost calls to our mornings. They can ride the tunnel's own reflection to draw perfect pictures we're proud to publish. They've turned our stopwatch against us. And that's when the hum flips. Not a roar, not a siren. Just a line answering itself right on cue. The mole and the insurance policy. George Blake doesn't look like a wrecking ball. Soft voice, polished manners, the kind of officer London trusts to sit in quiet rooms and make careful promises. But by the early 1950s, after a North Korean prison camp and a conversion in the shadows, ideology or survival or both, he's walking into KGB meetings and giving them the one thing they can't buy, our plans before we act. Here's where things get interesting. Blake briefs Moscow on stopwatch, on the tunnel concept, on the target zone near Rudo. He doesn't hand them blueprints scribbled in one night. He feeds them the cadence, the cast of characters, the tempo of British patience and American muscle. And the KGB faces a choice that defines the next few years. Do you burn the operation now and get a headline? Or do you let it live and turn it into a school? They choose school. Don't kill the tunnel, curate it. Don't break the line, learn the listener. That's the insurance policy. The KGB's counterintelligence people know something Western analysts often forget. Raw access is less valuable than shaping what the other side thinks they've accessed. So they design a failure that looks like success, plausible, rich, clockwork true. They protect the encrypted voice layer, keep it pristine so the cryptographers don't revolt, but they seed the metadata layer with theater. Not all at once, not a cartoon, just enough perfection to steer belief. To do that, they lean on two assets, Blake's drip feed about our method, and physics that doesn't need their hand every day. Because our splice isn't perfect. In wet Berlin clay, with paper-insulated copper under lead sheathing, tiny impedance mismatches throw reflections back down the line. A millisecond late echo. Crosstalk windows that sit at fixed delays. SIS tech notes say it out loud. Stable delayed replicas, predictable bands. Inside Moscow center, that's a gift. They don't have to hack the voice. They can ride the tunnel's own echo and nudge it. Insurance means predictability. The KGB needs our analysts to trust the wrong thing for long enough to make it policy. So they let true traffic run and layer ghost, switch, signatures on top when it matters. Carrier nudges, impulse trains that line up with our sampling windows. They couldn't do it blind. They needed our rhythm. Blake supplied that. How long we log when we rotate shifts, which patterns get flagged as doctrine consistent. The West is hunting for elegant hierarchies, clear starts and teardowns, clean stress arcs during crises. So the KGB amplifies those tells. Early flags flicker and die in compartments. A British engineer writes that certain bursts are too stable to be organic under load. A CIA analyst notices that exercises always telegraph neatly during Western office hours, which is odd if the Soviets are hiding things from us. Field reports from assets in East Germany say a dispersal happened, while the dashboard shows massing and sustained holds. Each time, production tempo and confirmation bias beat caution. Fix your thresholds. Filter outliers. Stay on schedule. From the KGB's view, that's the point. Insurance is time. The longer the feed feels correct, the more the machine inside Langley and London reorganizes itself around it. Career paths attached to the tunnel's output. Procurement memos cite consistent traffic shaping indicative of readiness doctrine. Budget meetings point to those perfect graphs and argue for satellites to see what the tunnel proves. Moscow doesn't need to be right every day. They just need to be right at inflection points, enough to push us toward the most expensive answers to problems they design. Why keep voice content untouched? Because content is volatile. A single decrypted call can blow months of illusion. Metadata feels clean, it's math-colored. It wears the glow of objectivity. If the ciphers hold, analysts tell themselves the pattern layer is the truest layer we've got. And once metadata is crowned as truth, the adversary doesn't have to scream. They whisper with timing. Get this, Blake isn't just reporting on our plans, he's learning our appetites. He hears which generals, circuits we're desperate to map, which ministries our politicians obsess over, which nodes our models elevate as center of gravity. So when the KGB stages a leak in East Berlin that accidentally aligns with a ghost surge, the West congratulates itself. Look at that cross-validate. Humant and SIGINT agree. Except the human was nudged and the signal was echoed. Insurance goes beyond Berlin. In staff meetings, KGB planners ask the petty but crucial questions. What are their peak analysis hours? When does London's senior desk sign off? When does Langley's briefer prep the morning book? Then they schedule quiet periods. Lines mysteriously clean up during our peak windows, making our calibrations feel righteous. Outside those windows, noise returns, but we've already filed the report, so who cares? Here's the twist. The KGB doesn't need every Western skeptic silenced. They just need the skeptics trapped behind need-to-know walls. A compartment labeled physics anomalies, line health, sits 3 doors removed from strategic assessments, leadership posture. The note about fixed millisecond echoes never crosses into the room where call graphs steer posture memos. That's not an accident. That's how the insurance policy pays out. And Moscow keeps a final card, a public exit. In 1956, they'll discover the tunnel with cameras and outrage. By then, the real work is done. The West will spin that the voice take was valuable. The metadata doubts, buried. The culture, still in place. The insurance policy isn't just protecting one line, it's protecting a way of seeing. You think you know bugs, tapes, and lucky breaks. Here's the twist. They taught our sensor to lie to us, then let us teach ourselves to love the lie. The physics of betrayal, what echo really was. Let's crawl into the wire itself. Picture paper-insulated copper, wrapped in lead sheathing, running through damp Berlin clay. The Soviets, trunk lines on pristine lab builds. Their robust, old-school telephony, balanced pairs meant to carry a lot of voice channels with predictable impedance. Now, when you splice into that, you've got one job. Don't change the line the switch thinks it sees. If you do, the line starts to reflect tiny bits of energy back on itself. That reflection is the echo. Here's where things get interesting. Impedance is just how hard the line pushes back against the signal. If your tap adds a few ohms the wrong way, or leaves a tiny unshielded segment next to a damp ground path, you create a mismatch. In wet soil with stray currents and imperfect grounds, that mismatch becomes a mirror. Signals hit your splice, some go forward like normal, and a thin slice bounces back. Not seconds later, milliseconds. Fixed delays, tied to the length of cable between discontinuities. Now a healthy trunk should show a little noise, a little crosstalk, sure. But a persistent delayed replica at the same offset, stable across hours, that's a fingerprint. And those fixed delay fingerprints can trick simple event detectors. Because classic metadata parsers in that era weren't reading words. They were reading the on-off choreography of lines. Ringing, current, seizure, hold, teardown. If the echo rides at the right amplitude and timing, it can look like a second seizure event, or a hold that keeps reasserting, or a teardown followed by a clean start. You think you know, but the twist is in the soil. Moist clay changes the dielectric around the cable. That shifts the effective propagation speed and creates tidy crosstalk windows between adjacent pairs. Put an unshielded bridge too close to a stray ground return, and you've built a miniature delay line. Add in a slightly floating ground at the tap hut, and you've set the stage for stable reflection bands. Millisecond space ghosts that don't drift much unless temperature or load changes. But wait, there's more. The KGB doesn't need to engineer every blip. They just need to learn the rhythm of our samplers. If our analysts take snapshots in fixed windows, say every few seconds to track starts and stops, the adversary can inject tiny carrier nudges or impulse trains that hit right before the window closes. They time a subtle amplitude bump that, when reflected, lands squarely inside our parser's decision boundary. The tool sees start, because the echo fakes the step change its train to count. Here's the twist. Voice content stays untouched. The cipher still rides fine over the top. Your ear can't hear the ghost. Your decryptor doesn't even try. But the metadata layer, where the machine is just watching edges, thresholds, and timing, that's vulnerable. An echo that repeats at 3.7 milliseconds like clockwork becomes a scaffolding for ghost calls. You nudge the carrier a hair, let the reflection paint a second edge, and the dashboard draws a node linking two ministries that never spoke. Meanwhile, the analysts do the thing analysts do, calibrate. They run line health checks in their quiet hours, when by design, traffic is low. The reflection is cleanest then, the echo windows are most stable, and the measurements validate the feed. So the tools get tuned to the very condition that makes ghost events most believable. During peak Western office hours, when briefs are compiled and charts get frozen, the tunnel's environment looks perfect because Soviet operators also learned our schedule and cleaned their load accordingly. Our golden data lives in the dirtiest physics. Think about switch behavior. When a line seizes, there's a transient, an impulse. In trunk gear of the 1950s, those transients ring a little like a struck bell. Normally, you'd see a messy decay. But if your tap has a ground loop and a mismatched bridge, that ring can echo back with a neat, delayed bump. Stack a few of those, and your edge detector goes, yes, there's a controlled start. The parser isn't lying. It's obeying the rules you wrote. The physics is lying underneath. Unknown to most of the team, a few SIS techs actually bench-built sections of trunk to study this. In lab conditions, introduce a controlled mismatch and a ground loop, and you get predictable reflection windows. Feed in low-level impulses, far below voice audibility, and watch the metadata tools light up like Christmas. That's your ghost session. No decrypted word changes. The charts still tell a story, though, because the story lives in starts and stops. And that's the moment everything changed. Because once you accept that your stopwatch, your timing model, can be tricked by its own shadow, every clean hierarchy you proudly mapped becomes a suspect. The archive doesn't just contain recordings, it contains a training set your culture learned from. If the echo taught your tools what truth looks like, the lie becomes self-healing. You filter out the messy human stuff and keep the echo straight lines. Here's the kicker. The cleanest periods, the ones leaders loved, were often when moisture and load conspired to make the echo most stable. Perfect graphs, perfect lies. Physics didn't fail. We failed physics. Building the tunnel, building the bias. They didn't just dig a hole, they built a factory underground. Pumped through 24 hours, pushing back a water table that wanted to swallow the whole thing. Timber ribs creaked, then steel bracing went in. The air was damp and metallic. You could taste the clay. Every surface got painted with sealant because one drip in the wrong junction meant a ground path you didn't plan for. Power came in through isolated transformers. Lights ran on separate circuits, so a blown bulb wouldn't imprint on the line. Quiet wasn't a vibe, it was a spec. The cable farm looked like an altar. Racks on rubber mounts, copper bus bars polished like cutlery, patch panels labeled in 3 hands so no one misread a tag after a 20-hour shift. Gain stages were staged in inches, literally. Attenuators, matching transformers, isolation couplers, anything to make the trunks think nothing had changed. Engineers argued over a decibel like it was doctrine. They lined the tap bay with felt to kill reflections because someone swore a sharp clap could ride the metal and show up as hash. It was obsessive for a reason. One wrong impedance and the switch at the far end hears a different world. Meanwhile upstairs, the data doctrine got built with the same care and the same blind spots. Sampling windows were set early, fixed intervals, fixed thresholds, the clean, machine-friendly cadence analysts loved. The code that parsed starts and teardowns assumed healthy lines have messy edges, so too clean events were down-weighted as potential sensor artifacts. Outlier rules were hard-coded to bin anything that didn't fit the expected decay curves. It sounds careful. It is. Here's the twist. When your tap creates stable, tidy echo bands, your own hygiene strips the warning and keeps the lie. Production targets hung over the room, not sinister, just real. Metrics tracked daily summaries, weekly posture notes, quarterly assessments tied to reviews. You could get promoted for throughput and analytic impact, not for slowing a product because a ground loop made you itchy. So once the first reports landed and made senior people happy, those elegant hierarchies right, the workflow calcified. Dissent turned into an engineering ticket, not a strategic question. Flagged, logging, will investigate offline. Offline meant never. And confirmation bias did what it always does. Early wins set the template. When an exercise telegraphed cleanly and a later public event seemed to rhyme, the model got a halo. Any later messiness, human that didn't match, weather that should have bent load, got treated like the world being noisy, not the sensor being wrong. Analysts who colored inside the lines had green dashboards and clean streaks. Skeptics had footnotes and delays. Here's where it gets wild. The British did raise their hand. Tech notes from their side flagged repeatable millisecond offsets. They cautioned that in damp conditions, paper-insulated pairs can exhibit stable reflection windows. They suggested controlled outages and latency sweeps. Kill the line briefly, watch what comes back, prove the echo. Those memos got compartmented under line health and methods. The posture shop, the people drawing the big NATO-facing charts, never saw the physics note. Walls that keep secrets safe also keep truth from traveling. Culturally, SIS favored craft and forensics. CIA favored scale and momentum. That blend can be great, until it is. In this tunnel, the American machine wanted product. The British engineers wanted to keep testing. A liaison meeting tries to square both. Agree on a calibration block every night, right before the morning briefs. Sounds good. Except that's when Soviet operators later learn our schedule and lighten their load, which makes the echo cleanest. So our golden hours bake the worst bias into the tools. We validated the ghost at its prettiest. Human incentives added weight. A young analyst lands a chart on a deputy's desk that looks like a textbook tree of command. The deputy quotes it in a meeting. The analyst becomes the tunnel person. Requests pile in. Can you break out air versus ground? Can you isolate Warsaw Pact ministries? More asks mean less time to sanity check the sensor. Every minute partitioning nodes is a minute not ripping open the tap hut floor to remeasure a ground. Nobody's lazy. They're just rewarded for answers, not autopsies. Meanwhile, the build team kept perfecting. They re-terminated connectors, relaced cables, upgraded pumps. Each tweak made the system feel more professional, which perversely made the charts look cleaner, which locked belief tighter. A better-looking room made a better-looking line. And because nobody wants to be the person who breaks the thing everyone loves, the do not touch without authorization list got longer. Touch points froze. Across the line, the KGB didn't have to push hard. They could see our cadence through Blake and adjust their own load to make our windows sing. Tiny carrier nudges at predictable times, maintenance that just so happened to align with our calibration block. The physics did most of the work. They just kept time. British warnings circled back one more time after a noisy week, phase drifts, jitter bands widening with rain. The note said, "Our cleanest periods correlate with the wettest soil. Suspect reflection stability." It read like a paradox, so it got parked. The next week's posture note landed on time, beautiful as ever. And that's the core bias. The machine is humming, therefore we trust it. The hum felt like competence. The output felt like certainty. The tunnel became a mirror, and nobody checked if the face looking back was ours. The harvest, perfect data that was too perfect. At first, the graphs were gorgeous. Call graphs drew themselves like blueprints, clean trunks, neat branches, tidy leaves. You could trace a general staff spine, then watch subordinate nodes flicker alive in exact, staggered order. It matched what doctrine said a disciplined command chain should look like. Elegant, predictable, a little too predictable. Here's where things get interesting. Real networks breathe weird. They spike at odd hours, they cough under load, they smear when weather hits or when duty officers miss handoffs. These lines, they performed like they'd rehearsed for an inspection. During real crises, border standoffs, leadership speeches, test alerts, the metadata never hiccuped. Zero blind spots, no breakage, no flapping relays. The dashboards glowed like nothing in East Germany had ever been stressed. Analysts loved it because it read like confirmation. We depublish a posture note showing escalation ladders with millisecond-tight step-ups, and a week later a public parade would land on a date our model hinted. Correlation cells. A deputy slaps the chart in a binder, says, "Keep running this." The glow of being right drowns the tiny wrongs. But the tiny wrongs kept stacking.